Welcome, one and all, to PsychoSocial Healing 0.5. This is a 5-week free workshop each Sunday at 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, and I will be active in the group during the week, creating fun and helpful ways for you to learn more, interact, ask questions, and together we'll all help and improve and maximize our experience here for the next 5 weeks. This course tackles the topics of our social nature, anxiety, stress, trauma, and self-esteem. This is the abridged version of PsychoSocial Healing 1.0, which is now available at www.psychosocialhealing.com. I'm offering a limited time discount for those who join me on this journey. For as long as this free course is live, the offer will be available. I want to offer my most sincere thanks for making the investment of time to participate, and in doing so, investing in yourself. Seriously, I want that investment to be worth it, and you want that investment to be worth it. The investment of your one true premium. The one investment you can never get back, your time. Investing in your growth enough to do the exercises, come back each week, and being serious enough to change is what will make this course worth your time. And as I said, you're not getting this time back, so it's best to treat this time for its priceless nature and squeeze the absolute most out of me and yourself. None of this will work unless you do. With that in mind, I am so excited about sharing with you what has been years and years of study, action, growing from adversity, going through psychotherapy and doing inner work, distilled down to 5 chapters with exercises at the end for you to internalize the lessons learned. Today is chapter 1. Our social nature. Here we address our deeply hardwired social nature, the characteristics and pitfalls of being a highly social species, the impact of living in this kind of society, along with some clues for a better society. So grab a notepad, lock in, and let's dive in. Human beings are social beings first, emotional beings second, and intellectual beings third. We require socialization for optimal development. One of the ways that we develop from infancy is through being social creatures. Infant babies require attuned interaction and emotional responsiveness. Thus, babies develop a sense of physical interaction with someone that isn't them and the effects of those interactions. This was actually demonstrated in the tragic experiment conducted by King Frederick II of Sicily, who was actually trying to find out what the natural language of humans would be, suspecting it to either be Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. For this experiment, he procured an unknown number of infants, kept them each in a solitary room, and gave nurses strict instructions on how to raise them. The children were fed, bathed, and changed on a daily basis, but other than the minimal physical contact that entailed, they were not touched, spoken to, or interacted with in any way. Frederick never got an answer to this experiment, as every single infant died. Cause of death? Stress dwarfism. It turns out that during our infancy, clapping of hands, seeing and responding to gestures and blandishments and empathetic touch are literal life needs. Just as the body needs nutrients in terms of the chemical compounds that the body turns into energy and nourishment, the brain requires caring social contact. The effect of active empathetic touch is massive. It engages the parasympathetic nervous system and leads to the secretion of growth hormones, oxytocin and serotonin. Let's touch on one of the most important ones here. I want you to meet oxytocin. This neurotransmitter is the bonding chemical. And I mean bonding in every human sense of the word, from sexual arousal to social trust. The presence of oxytocin has been linked to lowered anxiety and stress, the regulation of emotions, and pro-social behaviours. I myself have conducted years of informal research into the actions that generate oxytocin and serotonin through my free hugs activism. Overall, my findings are that the average hug lasted for 7 to 10 seconds, while some studies say that a continuous hug of at least 20 seconds is required to release oxytocin. I found in my own informal studies that different people have different levels of physical intimacy needs, especially when it comes to physical intimacy with a stranger in public. While I can only attest to the short-term effects felt by those who came for a hug, because they often left soon after, the effect on myself was quite surprising. For someone of my anxious disposition, standing in the middle of a crowded high street, holding a free hug sign, this understandably garnered some mocking or even evasion. However, I actually remained in good spirits because the hugs and the whole experience itself kept me topped up with a warm, fuzzy feeling where I wasn't affected by the less than negative reception from some. If you search on YouTube, you'll actually be able to find a video showcasing my free hugs in the Kent towns of Maidstone, Brighton and Eastbourne. Attachment theory. We human beings are a social species, and as such, we are hardwired for attachment. As we are fragile beings for the first several years of life, attachment ensures safety and survival. As we grow, we develop what are known as styles of attachment, where we engage in behaviours to meet our attachment needs and develop beliefs about the conditions surrounding those needs. Examples of attachment behaviours would be things like reaching out to a primary caregiver or initiating a loving text exchange. We are also wired to attach to, or at least be more influenced by, individuals in the environment that sub-communicate confidence and strength with their non-verbal behaviours. The closest thing humanity has to a universal language, while not often logically understood, but rather intuitively felt. The research of Dr. Paul Ekman is perhaps the foremost body of work in the area of body language, and particularly in discovering that there are 7 basic universal facial expressions that correspond with 7 basic emotional states. So for the sake of seeing how well you can identify these, I'm going to bring up an image of each facial expression, and I want you to just go with your gut instinct. Okay, first image. And second image. And the third image. And the fourth. And the fifth. And the sixth. And the final facial expression. Did you get any of them? Well, the first was anger. Notice the brow is turned down and inwards in the middle, the eyes intense and the mouth pursed. We human beings recognize this facial expression quicker than any other, due to the fact that seeing it expressed in your direction is a signal of threat. The second was disgust. Notice the features of the face are all pulled inwards toward the middle of the face. The crinkled nose, which draws the top lip up, exposing the front teeth, and the middle of the brow downwards. The third was fear. Notice the raised eyebrows causing creasing in the forehead, and wide open eyes to take in as much visual data as possible, and the mouth slightly open with the corners of the mouth turned down. The fourth is surprise, a similar facial expression to fear, except that the mouth is merely open without the corners turned down, and the eyes are wide but not fearful. Fifth is happiness or joy. Notice that smile, accompanied by a raising of the cheeks and a softening of the eyes. Normally we can sometimes see little lines past the corners of the eyes, known as Duchenne markers. These are the signs of a genuine smile. The sixth is sadness. Notice the bottom lip more pronounced, with the corners of the mouth turned down again. The brow is knitted in the middle, but the brows themselves are raised. And the seventh was contempt. Notice the flat affect across the top half of the face, while the mouth is actually drawn up on one side. This is the only universal facial expression that is asymmetrical, meaning different on each side. Our early ancestors relied upon the body's own signals and sensations. We could literally feel fear in our body without needing to understand the nature of the threat. Those that responded anxiously to threats and attached to and learned from those in their environment that were strong and confident survived. This was an essential survival tool for those individuals less capable of being able to physically defend themselves in moments of conflict. When we are separated from our mothers as infants, we would feel that separation and cry. A lack of consistency in caregivers to be properly attuned to their children when physically present leads to an attachment wound, a connection that is ripped off. We start feeling like we can't trust our caregiver to respond in the way that we need. And from there we start developing what are known as insecure attachment styles. Our relationship with our primary caregivers lays the foundation for how we will likely relate to ourselves and others later in life. This means that the relationship you had with your caregivers is likely to be the same or similar relationship you will have with those that you become intimate with later in life. So it's crucial that this period be met with a compassionate and nurturing presence from caregivers all through our formative years, and then a secure attachment style can be established from the beginning. As you can tell, this is not the case for most people. Most of our childhoods are fraught with adverse childhood experiences and or emotionally and or physically absent parents or caregivers due to the massive demands of the current socioeconomic system for parents to go out during the day, engaging in the servitude that earns these things called money that pays the bills, which is actually inflicting a separation nearly every single day of that child's life. And when the caregiver does come home from work, they're often still carrying stress, which further prevents a clean connection between parent and child. Let's not forget that under this system, the children themselves are required at a certain age to also go off into education to prepare them for the same fate as their parents. Effects of social isolation. There have been numerous studies done about the effect that lack of social contact has done during the 2020 lockdown. Mental health helplines during the beginning of the pandemic reported that people were actually more afraid of being lonely than contracting the virus. The first lockdown saw a massive spike in prescriptions of sleeping medications, anxiety medications, and antidepressants. Waves of panic buying would ensue, creating a frustrating and self-reinforcing behaviour from others who also needed to be able to buy the same goods. The 2020 lockdown changed the social constructs, perhaps forever. There are now new divides between those in society. We have been pressured, sometimes under the threat of legal punishment, to adhere to respiratory health and infection control precautions on a level that had forced a different approach to living and relating to everyone else around us. And then there's all the conflicting ideas around the choice of which restrictions and precautions should apply where. As a result, calling out hypocrisies actually became a popular form of small talk. This unfortunately also was extended to those involved with escalating protest action, or merely pointing out a problem and demanding action. Our social bonds are integral. As such, the imperative is to maintain their upkeep. Central to the consideration of social cohesion are the states of empathy and compassion. These things are even hardwired into our very brains. Meet the mirror neuron system. It's actually quite a newly discovered network of brain cells, the purpose of which so far has been determined as action understanding. This means the observation, interpretation, and even anticipation of the actions and intentions of others. It is the empathy system. As such, it has been discovered that when observing an action performed by another person, the very same part of your motor cortex in the brain that would need to fire for you to perform that action will fire. Have you ever noticed that yawns are contagious? It's strange that just watching someone yawn makes you want to resist the urge to yawn yourself. Your eyes narrow, your jaw starts to open. How many of you are now yawning? And how many of you fought as hard as you could not to yawn? This is a form of echo phenomena known as contagious yawning. What's happening is that you are watching me and hearing me yawn, and your mirror neurons told you to imitate the behavior. In studies conducted on this, the phenomena is actually magnified by social closeness, instructing the person to resist the urge to yawn, and even by using transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. If you did yawn, you're probably feeling a little calmer, maybe a little better. This is because the act of yawning engages our parasympathetic nervous system, or PNS, applying the brakes and calming you down. Later on in this program, we will come back to the PNS because it plays a critical role. Observing and imitating someone else's body language can actually put you into their emotional state. This is because the brain and the body play a reciprocal role in expressing, identifying, and reflecting behavior. We want to be seen as another member of the same tribe, so we unconsciously reflect the same expressions and behaviors to fit in. And we need to be able to do that fast. Human beings can subconsciously read facial expressions and log the emotional state that corresponds to that expression in a fraction of a second. Interestingly, as I said earlier, we detect angry faces quicker than we detect any other kind of expression. This is actually handy for our negativity bias to kick in our fight, flight, freeze from threatening people, animals, or situations as quickly as possible. While the benefits of being a social species is empathy, cooperation, and thus the potential for progress, the cons are group pressure and group think, and thus the potential for social control, stagnation within the status quo, or worse, exacerbation of existing social issues. An example will be what's known as groupthink. This is a social phenomenon which results in a crowd becoming so desperate for harmony and conformity that the quality of decision making is compromised, with an in-group who is on board with the majority narrative and an out-group who is either opposed or just not on board. Now, of course, this is a necessary element of our thinking as a social species. It is a tool for creating the kind of ideological and interpersonal structure to have a society, considering the fact that we human beings have been using trial and error, patchworking our society together for hundreds of thousands of years. The trouble is, once we've got an idea in place, we don't like to have to go back to square one to rethink a new idea. That's not expedient. So for a very long time, human society has sacrificed an updating social system for an established social system. Within an established society, there are established rules of behaviour and necessary values that are expected of the population. De-individuation. An example of groupthink in action. The term refers to a group behavioural phenomenon of being anonymous as part of a crowd. Individual thought is lost in service to the whim of the mob itself. The feeling of anonymity removes the potential feeling for personal accountability, while the crowd all participating creates further social permission to act in that way. In this scenario, harmony is the first casualty, and each person's individual intentions shift to reflect the mob mentality. So you can only imagine how protest marches, especially such as the Million Mask March, would be breeding grounds for de-individuation. And having attended several of these events myself, I can tell from personal experience that it takes virtually no time at all for de-individuation to take hold. At these kinds of events, people are already mobilizing and marching against something, which means they're automatically bringing a negative and angry energy, as it were. When you march against something, you become consumed by the need to voice that discontent and the need to feel like it is being heard and addressed. People gather in a big group to occupy the streets for a brief time. They march in seeming unity to a cause of being against something and demanding redress for their grievances, even to the point of shouting at buildings and the police officers that are out there to maintain order. So the stage is already set for a division between the public, who demand to have their voices heard, and a police force who are under orders to contain and neutralize any angry energy. In some cases, the police actually serve an inflammatory role by deploying tactics such as a kettle. This is when the police seek to encircle and effectively imprison a group of people in a public place for a certain time. And as the name suggests, when you close the kettle and switch it on, the water inside will boil. And that's exactly what happens. The people start to kick off, and it gives the police the perfect excuse to then start making arrests because the mob have become riled up. One interesting factor is how chants can be used by the crowd to both reinforce the narrative and to argue the point of the protest. Chants such as "One Solution, Revolution," with the first part recited by the cheerleader, as it were, and the second part recited by the crowd. I would personally argue that while yes, to a certain degree, revolution is required depending on your definition. However, the true solution lies in the better ideas that are advocated before, during, and after the revolution. In essence, a revolution is only a means by which a positive social evolution can take place. We need to be advocating the right direction of social evolution to create a viable revolution. Another chant used at this march was, "Whose streets? Our streets," denoting the will of the public to reclaim and occupy the physical territory. There's something to the sense of having our rightful place taken from us and needing to take it back. Notice that this is the same principle behind the Leave campaign of Brexit, to take back control. Social conditioning, for all its traps, is, however, extremely important. You see, human beings learn through two main avenues: first-hand experience, where you actually do it yourself, and second-hand experience, where you learn from someone else's experience or opinion. Obviously, first-hand experience is much more persuasive to us. However, there are many things that are either too time-consuming, too dangerous, or even deadly for a single person to have to learn firsthand. For instance, jumping out of a plane without a parachute. When we learn through second-hand experience, we filter information through three considerations. And this insight is especially important if you wish to be a communicator of new ideas. Because your average success or failure to communicate persuasively is going to depend on these three factors. Number one, the communicator's confidence level. Meaning, how certain are they of what they're saying? Say you're out with your friends and there's no set plan on where to go next, and you point and say, "That way," in a steady, strong tone of voice. Your friends are more likely to go with you. Number two, the communicator's congruency with their message. Meaning, are they living what they're preaching? Coming back to you and your friends, if you're actually already pointed and headed in that direction, your friends are even more likely to go with you. And number three, the amount of social compliance there is to that message. Meaning, how many others are also aligned with what you're putting down. So, if there's already a number of people walking with you, your friends are certain to go with you. We humans are susceptible to the opinion of the most confident sounding, because confidence in saying something is what is known as a true signal. It's behavioural evidence that they know what they're talking about. This is where the charlatan, the sleazy car salesman, the faith healer, the politician, the medium, and the psychic can all sometimes bypass our conscious logic. As you may already be guessing, our social conditioning is so often shaped by the demands of the kind of society we have. Consider the kind of social system we have today: a global monetary market system governed by representative politics and an archaic legal system. What kind of culture would such an arrangement create? Firstly, let's consider the psychosocial impact of having profit as one of the core drivers of most economic behaviour. You see, profit isn't just the expression of self-interest in the market. It is unfortunately the means by which the system offers safety distance from the serrated jaws of poverty. The system's punishment for not being marketable enough to have earned enough of those debt tokens we call money to cover your cost of living. Self-interest is inherently rewarded and required by this system, for it is both a matter of economic survival and a conditioned practice to aspire to. This naturally results in human beings conditioned to view each other with distrust and separation, for they are either your potential customers or worse, your economic competition. The principles of competition and the dissuading of cooperation, at least in the UK, is legally enforced by the legislation known as competition law. Another crucial consequence that we need to start using as evidence to change instead of another thing to just accept is the stresses of living in a system that doesn't consider you deserving of what you need to stay alive unless you earn it through working or welfare. Human beings were not meant for this. When we devote the majority of our lives to servitude that we don't appreciate and then still have to worry about having enough of this money to live is a toxic and destructive state of being. We end up living for others' profit and our own needs are neglected. Not only does this social precondition set us up for a myriad of medical and mental health problems, other larger social diseases like violence emerges. Imagine a person growing up in a broken home due to their parents' impoverishment, not having their need for emotionally present and attuned caregiving, perhaps being the victim of domestic violence. They suffer bullying at school due to being inept and an outsider. They struggle to gain good grades or a stable job, and then struggle with anxiety and stress issues, and out of desperation commit some crime to finally secure some financial or material safety. Is that their fault exclusively? Or does the social system itself have a hand in sending this individual down this path? Coming back to the biological repercussions, the fields of study known as behavioral biology and sociology are giving us very concerning findings when it comes to how our biology is directly and indirectly affected by the kind of stresses we endure, especially during our formative years, have long-reaching implications for human health. Columbia University conducted a study in 2015 which found that poverty directly correlates with cognitive impairment equivalent to brain damage. Language, decision-making and reading skills of the children studied were assessed, and was found that children living in families earning less than $25,000 a year had 6% less development on average than those families earning over $100,000 a year. Another study entitled Poverty Impedes Cognitive Function found that the stress and excess cortisol that's produced by financial stress had caused brain damage equivalent to a 13-point IQ deficit. A monetary market system will inherently favour a stratified society, for when people are acting in a market, those that fail to compete well and work hard are punished with a lower purchasing power, and those who play the game well are rewarded with a higher purchasing power. This dynamic also has a tendency of reinforcing and maximizing itself, as there are more financial rewards for those who have a higher purchasing power, while people in a lower purchasing power can actually often find themselves at the mercy of financial penalties. Or as the saying goes, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. One phrase that we've become familiar with, at least in the Western world, is the class system. And while social hierarchies is something that we humans are hardwired to respond to, as in it is more expedient to delegate the decision making to others we deem more worthy, as I explained earlier, we can be prone to establishing social paradigms. And in order to preserve the status quo, the idea that whatever social hierarchy is in place Any problems can just be solved by switching out the people at the top of the hierarchy. The structure itself gets a pass because it's much more difficult to consider the need to create a better social system entirely to make the current system obsolete. Hierarchies will protect themselves when attacked, so it's no use fighting the system, as it were. The existence of a class system is a great source of shame, comparison, and competition, again, as people in this society all individually and collectively have to game for their own economic survival in what they feel is a civic duty of working and consuming, working and consuming, working and consuming. And if you're not working, then the narrative is, well, all of us have to pay for you to sit on your arse. Of course, there is a safety net to this system in the form of benefits or welfare. However, as much as this safety net catches many of the people, the system of money gladly drops into poverty. Its very use has a culturally established shame judgment. If you're struggling, it's assumed you just can't be any use to society, or that you're just lazy. If your passions don't match your job prospects, you immediately have to deal with the shame of either rejecting a job that is beneath us all, or compromising your intrinsic motivation for something you hate just because it will pay the bills. Those on the receiving end of benefits are regarded as leeches on society, layabouts, bone idols, scroungers, parasites even. Work is deified as the prime means of having worth in our society. If you're doing your bit, then you're spared the shame of the tribe. But if you're not working and having your life funded by public money, right there is extremely fertile soil for value judgments, social comparison, prejudice, and massive shame. You may be familiar with the tragic case of Vicky Harrison, who became so depressed and ashamed of being unemployed that she committed suicide after being rejected by employers despite over 200 applications sent. This is a sick state of affairs, that the pressure to get a job is so great and the shame of not having a job is so great that some people will end themselves if they fail the societal expectation of getting and holding down a job. Is it then any wonder why every now and then we hear of someone with a gun or a vehicle that has caused mass violence? With our current system, we are creating layer upon layer of compounding and intertwining stress, neglect, hardship, disharmony, conflict, and deprivation. This, along with the punishments we dish out in a vain attempt to deter this violence, actually creates human time bombs. Remember the African proverb, a child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth? Peter Joseph, in his book The New Human Rights Movement, concluded, quote, epidemiological research indicts the market system of economics as a public health threat. So with all this said, how can social conditioning be used for the benefit of society? To give an example, I'd like to tell you a short story about the divergence of the chimpanzees and the bonobos. Story time. Better environment, better society. Our story begins 1.5 million years ago in a time known as the Pleistocene. The formation of the Congo River was becoming a permanent barrier to the south, and it's hypothesized that a group of ancestral chimpanzees made the daring crossing of the Congo before the waters became too strong and deep. However, once this crossing was made, they were forever separated from their brethren. Life north of the Congo was characterized by scarcity and therefore dominance hierarchies. The remaining ancestral chimpanzees had to compete with other troops of their kind and ancestral gorillas for scarce resources and territory. Aggressive power hierarchies inevitably rose, for only the most aggressive and most skilled at fighting survived to pass on their genes. This meant that chimpanzees developed immense physical strength, a nervous system attuned to testosterone and adrenaline, and a violent social order where dismemberment, murder, and even sexual assault were common weapons of conflict and social control. Meanwhile, south of the Congo, these daring chimpanzees had it easy. As it turns out, their journey was worth the dangerous crossing, as the ecology was much more plentiful south of the river, and they lacked any significant competition. What then was the use for aggression, which was so handy in a scarce environment? There was plenty to go round, and there was plenty of space to live well. Thus, there was no more use for aggression, and instead they began to become more egalitarian, sharing resources, for there was no need to hoard and aggressively protect something that was in abundance. As you can imagine, contrary to the chimpanzees north of the Congo, who became bigger and nastier, those south of the Congo actually became smaller and nicer. There was such a dramatic divergence between the northern and the southern chimps that they were classified as a new species known as bonobos, while the northern chimps are what we know today as the chimpanzee. In the bonobo troops, aggressiveness gave way to empathy and compassion. The traits of survival shifted. Females with good social support was an effective deterrent to male upstartism, and the alpha roles eventually shifted to females. During moments of conflict, instead of testosterone, the bonobos secrete cortisol, the body's stress hormone. Conflict makes the bonobos anxious instead of aggressive, and as a means of dealing with said anxiety, the bonobos engage in empathic touch, hugging, kissing, and even brief sexual encounters. It is interesting to note that this behaviour is observed across all ages and genders. The stark difference between their living conditions is a testament to how positive environmental pressures such as abundance instead of scarcity can yield positive social behaviours. It's interesting to note that feminine energy, as it were, in influential positions in the hierarchy, plus an abundant and supportive social environment, results in a positive social system, whereas masculine energy at the top of a dominance hierarchy is just a recipe for disaster. I would argue that it is not solely the gender focus on how society is governed that results in a positive social system. Rather, I am arguing that the difference is in the nature of the social environment in terms of abundance or scarcity and the strength of social connections. Abundant social environments lead to the recognition of the importance of the feminine, while scarce social environments force organisms into adopting the worst of the masculine just to hold a social system in some kind of order. So for human beings to learn of the necessity to positively change our society, it's critical to consider how we can create abundance and reduce scarcity. I will end this section with some hope in the form of academic research. In a study called Consensus Built Through the Actions of Committed Minorities, the phenomenon of tipping points was revealed. If up to 10% of a given culture were unshakable in their fervent advocacy of an idea, that triggered a rapid adoption of said idea across the culture. Of course, it is a struggle to reach that 10% to begin with, especially if the ideas are contrary to the status quo. However, there are more promising findings in the area of non-violent civil resistance. Erica Chenoweth revealed in her studies of violent and non-violent campaigns to achieve political change since 1900, the tipping point for the success of non-violent civil resistance was the active and sustained effort of just 3.5% of that country's population. Coupled with the ubiquitous nature of social media and other technologies, the ability to share information and ideas is now ever more accessible and is assisting in the increased success rate of non-violent campaigns over time. Human society has dragged its feet and its knuckles for long enough. It's the 21st century where we have the science and the technology to put robots on Mars. Surely putting food in every belly and a roof over every head isn't impossible. The human species is one huge interconnected family, and it's time we started behaving as such. A quote often attributed to Mohandas Gandhi applies here. We must be the change we wish to see in the world. What I think this phrase means is that in order to achieve a better world, you need to learn of better ideas and internalize them so that they radiate out to the world and inspire change. Change, ironically, is a constant. We live in what's called an emergent reality, meaning that everything is in a state of change. To realize that we change the world in all sorts of ways is to realize that changing things for the better is merely a matter of informing and directing your decisions and actions. When you become the change you wish to see, you become one more living example of the kind of values you would like to live by and the kind of world you would like to live in. And the more people that do that in a supportive way, the quicker the social change will happen. Of course, there is no need to try to force change to happen faster than it can. All you will do is break the connections between people and only create patchwork that doesn't address the problem itself. Positive social change can't be half-stepped. Our social connections can actually serve to make the process easier. As the African proverb goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Exercises. Number 1, phone a friend. Now, this is an exercise where you will reach out through some communication medium, even if it's just a text. Make the decision that you're at least going to text a friend, maybe even a friend that you haven't spoke to in a while. And you're just going to say something along the lines of, hey buddy, sorry I haven't been in touch. You've been in my thoughts lately and I've missed chatting. Number 2, sustained eye contact exercise. For this exercise, you're going to need a friend or someone that doesn't mind helping you out for a few minutes. What you're going to do is sit comfortably facing each other, and when you're both ready, establish eye contact and then keep it for 2 minutes. Now, this exercise is not as easy as it may seem, and it will have surprising effects. Most people giggle as a response to how awkward it can feel. However, after some time, a lot of people start to cry. You see, we're generally not used to the kind of intense and emotional experiences of really looking into someone's eyes. Because when you do, that is when you start connecting. You start seeing who they are. How we respond to stress and awkwardness says a lot about our resolve and self-image. As you see into them, you will also sense how they are seeing into you. Number 3, Action for Happiness calendar. At the beginning of each month, Action for Happiness releases a calendar which has one small activity or thought for each day to help you practice a life of healthy well-being. Number 4, Social experiments. For this exercise, you will be having certain social interactions. The point of these experiments is to enrich and improve your experiences with other people and to share a little positivity. If this prospect seems a little daunting, then just imagine that you're just a social scientist. Your own self-esteem would not be on the line here because these are just experiments and the responses you get is just the data you're gathering. First up, compliment a stranger. In your next or future interaction, I want you to offer a sincere compliment about them. A great time for a compliment is soon after the interaction begins. If it's appropriate, compliment them on their choice of clothing. Perhaps remark on an interesting hairstyle they may have. Whatever you do, don't do it for the reaction. This isn't an experiment in flirting. This is to familiarize yourself with being able to give positive social feedback while at the same time helping boost someone else's subjective sense of well-being. The last is create a new handshake with someone nearby. This is a great playful form of social bonding. Next time you're at a social event, if it's appropriate, challenge someone near to you to join you in creating a brand new handshake. This collaborative exercise will likely have both of you smiling or even giggling, even if a little awkwardly, and can be carried over to all your interactions with that person in the future because you both now have your own handshake. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon for more pieces of information and healing. Take care now.